Hey friends, was machst du? How's everyone doing? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Nun Aleph of Masechta Shabbos, that 151. Oh my gosh, friends, we are getting close. Today's Daf is not too difficult, I think. For me at least, because I'm so smart. Just kidding. Let's go weiter. Anyways. Right, exactly. So the daf starts off with just a continuation of like the discussion of Abba Shaul's statement about things that you could say. You are also permitted to go hang out by the end of the Tchum. We talk about sounding a flute brought by a Gentile on Shabbos. Can you blow that flute after Shabbos for somebody who passed away? Okay. What else do you... then we talk about Mesim a little bit. When people pass away, we actually talk about a little bit of the process of like Tahara, what you do with the body. We don't get into too much detail, but a little bit, I guess. And then we get into a bunch of agadata. So, friends, let's get started. Kuf Nun Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Okay, so the Mishnah had said, Klal Amar Abba Shaul Kol Sha'ani V'chule. So Abba Shaul had said that anything that I am allowed to talk about on Shabbos, any malacha that I'd be allowed to talk about because it's permissible to do the malacha in a permitted way, so I would be allowed to talk about it. I would be allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos so that I can get to that right after Shabbos. So Abba Shaul Aheya. So we want to understand when Abba Shaul says, and there's a general rule that anything you're allowed to talk about, you're also allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos. Which part of the Mishnah is he talking about? If we're going to say that he is reflecting on, or he's responding to, or whatever he's going on, the Reisha of the Mishnah, which is in Machshichin ala Tchum Lischor Poalim Ulavi Peris, that we do not hang out at the edge of the Tchum Shabbos in order so that right after Shabbos we could hire workers or harvest fruits. Well, Hai Kol Sha'ani Zakai Ba'amirasei Rashai Ani Bachshichaso Kol She'eni Zakai Ba'amiraso Eni Rashai Bachshichaso Mibaile. Let's read that again. Right, so if we say that Abba Shaul is going on the Reisha of the Mishnah, the Reisha that says that you're not allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos, so that after Shabbos you can hire workers and harvest fruits. Well, if that's the case, then Abba Shaul's statement it's not really a natural fit, let's say, right? When Abba Shaul says that anything that I'm allowed to talk about, I'm also allowed to hang out by the edge of Tchum Shabbos for it. Well, really, if it was going on the Reisha, what it should say is Kol she'eni zakai ba'amiraso, eni rashai b'achshichaso. It should say instead, anything that I'm not allowed to talk about, I'm not allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos, because after all, the Reisha of the Mishnah is talking about things that you're not allowed to hang out by the Tchum Shabbos for, like you're not allowed to hang out by the edge of Tchum Shabbos if you're going to go hire workers or if you're going to go harvest your fruit. But Abba Shaul's statement is in the positive. It's in the things that I can talk about. I can hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos. So Ela Aseifakai. Okay. So rather, we want to argue that Abba Shaul is going on the end, the last part of the Mishnah, which is Avamachshechu Lishmor Umevi Peres Biado. That a Yid would be allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos in order to guard his fruits, and then once he's there, he can bring back fruits if he wants. Fine. So over there, we talk about what he is allowed to do. He's allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos, if it's just to guard his fruits, and therefore, it would make more sense to say that Abba Shaul, whose statement is in the positive, things that you are allowed to talk about, you are allowed to hang out by the edge of Tchum Shabbos, would make sense that he would be going on the Sefer, which is talking about a situation where you are allowed to hang out by the edge of Tchum Shabbos, which is if you want to guard your fruits. But the Gemara isn't satisfied. Hai kol sha'ani zakai b'achshichaso rashai ani ba'amiraso miba'ilei. But the Gemara says, yeah, but still we are unsatisfied because looking at Abba Shaul's statement, what does he say? He says, anything that I'm allowed to talk about on Shabbos, I'm allowed to hang out by the Tchum Shabbos. Now, in our Mishnah, nobody says anything about talking, right? Abba Shaul is talking about talking, right? Anything that I'm allowed to talk about, I'm allowed to hang out by the Tchum Shabbos for. But the Mishnah isn't talking about things that you're allowed to talk about. It's just saying that you're allowed to go to the Tchum Shabbos to guard your fruit. So Abba Shaul, if he was going on the Sefer, what it should say is anything that you're allowed to go to the Tchum Shabbos for, you're also allowed to talk about. That's not what he says. He says anything I'm allowed to talk about, I can go to the Tchum Shabbos for. It's very technical, but this is what the Gemara is excited about right now. Fine. So let's read that again. Right? So instead, what Abba Shaul should say if he's going on the Sefer is that anything that I'm allowed to hang out at the edge of the Tchum Shabbos for, I'm allowed to talk about. But he says the opposite. So the Olam HaSefer, okay? So the Gemara says, really, Abba Shaul is going on the Sefer, fine. Abba Shaul ahakai. Now, Abba Shaul, when he makes his statement, he's taking into account the following statement of Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. A person is allowed to say to his friend, Shmor li peris shebetchumech vani eshmor lach peris shebetchumi. Reuven is allowed to say to Shimon, hey Shimon, why don't you guard some fruit for me? You know, Reuven's in Yerushalayim, Shimon's in Tel Aviv. Reuven says to Shimon, Shimon, can you guard for me some fruit in Tel Aviv, and I'll guard for you some fruit in Yerushalayim. And we say that is 100% acceptable. V'kamar Abba Shaul, and Abba Shaul is saying the Tanakama. Now Abba Shaul is saying to the Tanakama, Milo modis, do you not agree to me, Mr. Tanakama? Demuter Adam lomar lachavero, that Reuven could say to Shimon, Shmor li peris shebetchumech vani eshmor lecha peris shebetchumi. Shimon, can you guard some fruits for me in Tel Aviv, and I'll guard some fruits for you in Yerushalayim? Ve'ema, and then I'll say, so kol she'ani zakei b'miraso, anything that I'm allowed to talk about, such as this, Rasha and Elach Shechalav, I would also be allowed to go as far as I can by the Tchum Shabbos, for it, so that I can get to it right after Shabbos. Klal la'asuye mai. Now the Gemara wants to say, when Abba Shaul says that it's a general rule, what's the general rule coming to include? La'asuye adatani rabbanan, it's coming to include the following, brisa. Ein machshichin al atchum lavi behema, that we do not hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos to bring an animal after Shabbos. If the animal was standing outside of Tchum Shabbos, you can, call to it and it will come into the Tchum Shabbos. Now Abba Shaul says, and it sounds like he's arguing on the Reisha. That's the way I understand it, right? That the Reisha says that you are not allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum in order to get an animal. But I think Abba Shaul is saying is like, wait, but you can talk about getting an animal on Shabbos, I assume, because this is how I'm understanding it. Because if there was walls over there, you would be allowed to bring it, right? Just like we had said the other day about, what were we saying about bringing what was it, fruits, I think. So anything that I'm allowed to talk about, I can also hang out by the Tchum Shabbos for. And we can also hang out by the edge of the Tchum if it is to afterwards be able to get some hadassim for this crown thing of a bride, and also for a person who passed away, la'avilo aron v'tachrichim, to bring for him a coffin and shrouds. V'omrim lo, and we can even say lech l'makom ploni v'im lo matzos b'makom ploni avim b'makom ploni. We can even talk about hey, if you can't find it here, maybe go there. Lo matzos b'mana if you can't find it for 100, so then bring it for 200. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda isn't into that last part about giving specific monetary amounts, but he would say that you could talk about, bringing a meis v'tachrichim and things like that. Okay, so that is Abba Shaul's general rule about anything that you're allowed to talk about on Shabbos. You would also be allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos for it. So says the Mishnah that you're allowed to hang out. It's a new Mishnah that you're allowed to hang out by the edge of the Tchum Shabbos in order to, be ready to take care of things for a bride or for somebody who passed away after Shabbos, meaning that after Shabbos you can be osek with these things. Lavi lo aron v'tachrichim, to bring for him a coffin or shrouds. Nachru shevi chalilin b'Shabbos lo yispod boyan Yisrael elim kein ba'om makom karov. If a Gentile brings flutes on Shabbos, Gentile comes to town on Shabbos, he has some flutes, and these flutes were used, I guess that when somebody passed away, they would blow flutes for some purpose. So if a Nachri came with these flutes, so a Yid is only allowed to use these flutes if he knows that they came from within the Tchum Shabbos, right? If they came from outside of the Tchum Shabbos, so then a Yid would not be allowed to use it ever, right? Of course he's not going to be using it on Shabbos. It means that Rashi says it's some kind of a knas, some kind of a fine that, if the Gentile brought these flutes from outside of the Tchum Shabbos, so then Yidden would not be allowed to use them ever. But if they were from within the Tchum Shabbos, so then the Yidden can use them, obviously, after Shabbos. Asulo Aron, if they made if non-Jewish people made for themselves an aron, a coffin, v'chafru kever, or they dug a grave for, a fellow non-Jew, yikaver bo Yisrael, meaning, and they did that on Shabbos, so then a Jew can nonetheless be buried in that grave or in that coffin, assuming that the non-Jew had constructed the coffin or dug the grave for a non-Jew, so then a Jew would be able to be buried there, either in the grave or in the coffin. Fine. However, if the non-Jew had assembled the coffin or dug the grave on Shabbos specifically for a Yid, well then a Yid would be unable to be buried in that coffin or in that grave. What does it mean that you can only, says the Gemara, what does it mean that you can only use the flute after Shabbos, of course, if it was brought into the town on Shabbos from within the Tchum Shabbos? Rav says you have to know with 100% certainty that these flutes came from within the Tchum Shabbos. If you have any doubt, well then you have to assume that they came from outside of the Tchum Shabbos. Ushmuel Amar, Chashinan Shema Chutz Lichoma Lanu. Where Shmuel says no, we can assume, right? So interesting. So Chashinan generally means to suspect. Over here it doesn't mean to suspect. Over here it means to assume. And Rashi points out that there are other other contexts as well where you can translate Chashinan as to assume. So Shmuel is saying that we can assume that maybe this flute came from right outside of the walls of the city, i.e. certainly within the Tchum Shabbos. So if, Rav says that in order to be able to use this flute, you would have to know with 100% certainty that it was brought into the city on Shabbos from within the Tchum Shabbos. If you have any doubt or uncertainty, then you cannot use it. Shmuel says that you can assume that the flute came from within the Tchum Shabbos. So the Gemara wants to say that you can imply that our Mishnah supports Shmuel. How come? Diktani asalo aron v'chaferlo kever yikaver bo Yisrael, because we say that if on Shabbos a non-Jew assembled a coffin or dug a grave, so a Jew can be buried in it. So we see that out of safek it's permitted, meaning we have no way to know the non-Jew's intention when he assembled the coffin or dug the grave. However, as long as we, don't know for sure that it was built with the Jewish person who passed away in mind, well then out of safek we can use it. So let's say also that regarding the flute, as long as we don't know for sure that the non-Jew came from outside of the Tchum Shabbos, so we can assume that he came from within the Tchum Shabbos, and you would be allowed to use these flutes at the funeral. Now we also have a brisa, however, that supports Rav. If you have a city that you have Yidden and non-Jews living in the same city, and there was therein a shvitz, a bathhouse. Hamerchetzes b'Shabbos, and the shvitz functions on Shabbos. Imrov nachrim le'erev rochitz b'miyad. So if the majority of the citizens, of the people, of the residents of the city are non-Jewish, well then a Yid can go to the shvitz immediately after Shabbos, because you can assume that the water was heated up for the non-Jewish residents. Imrov Yisrael yamten ad kadei sheyichamu chamen. If the majority of the residents of the city are Yidden, well then you should wait after Shabbos for enough time that it takes to heat up the hot water so that you know that any hot water that you will be benefiting from was heated up after Shabbos. Mechza al mechza, yamtin an kadei sheyichamu chamen. However, if I skipped Asr and the Vav because the Rashi doesn't have it and the Gilyon says to skip it, so I skipped it. If, however, there is a 50-50 split in the city, well then you should be strict and wait the half an hour. So what do we see? Well, not the half an hour, but until that they enough time for the hot water to heat up. So what do we see? So we see that out of Safek we're being machmir, right? We're saying we don't know if the hot water was heated up by the bathhouse attendant for the Jews or for the non-Jews, because it's 50% Jewish, 50% non-Jewish. So we can't just assume that he had intention for the non-Jewish people. We have to be strict and assume that maybe he heated up the hot water on Shabbos for the Jews, and you have to wait enough time that it would take for the hot water to heat up in a situation where the city is 50-50 and we don't know. So therefore we see from this brisa, like Rav, that when you're not sure, you have a suffix, you have to be machmir. So that is like Rav, who says that when we're not sure if the flute came from within the Tchum Shabbos, we have to assume that it came from outside of the Tchum Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, be'ambate ktana, if it's a small little shvitz, if it's a small little bath, Im yeshba rashus, if in the city there is a very wealthy and powerful man, rochetz ba miyad, then you would be allowed to bathe in that little bath right after Shabbos. My rashus, what is this very wealthy and powerful man that on account of him anybody would be able to bathe in the bath right after Shabbos? Amar of Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yitzchak Breder Rav Yehuda. So it says Rav Yehuda in the name of apparently, possibly his son Rav Yitzchak. That was a note in the article, but apparently other people argue on that. But Im yesh ba adam chashuv sheish lo asara avadim shemchamen lo asara kumkimin b'vas achaz b'ambatek tana muter lerchotz b'miyad. Isn't that interesting? So you have this guy that he's got 10 servants, and the 10 servants can simultaneously heat up 10 kettles of water, so that very quickly and efficiently you can heat up this little bathhouse. So in that case, you can assume that if in the city there is such a person who has these 10 servants who would be able to very quickly heat up the water for a bath, well then you are allowed to rely upon that and say, hey, whatever hot water is in this small little bath was heated up immediately after Shabbos by all of these servants, and they were not heated up on Shabbos. Very interesting. So we said that if a non-Jew constructed assembled a coffin or dug a grave and on Shabbos, and you don't know, if he did it, if the non-Jew assembled the coffin or dug the grave specifically for a Jew or not, well, you can assume that it was for a non-Jew, and therefore you would be allowed to bury the Jew in this coffin in the grave. Amai, how come? Why don't we just wait enough time that it would take to assemble a coffin, and then we know that no matter what, at least there was enough time to have theoretically built this coffin after Shabbos. So Amar Ula be'omed be'isratya. Right, so Ula says, well, that really just works for if the grave was dug in a public thoroughfare, because that's a place where non-Jews would be buried. Jews wouldn't be buried on like a main road like that. So Tenach Kever Aron Ma'ikil Memar. Well, that really actually only just works for the grave. Meaning, so if there's a grave that's buried right in a public area, so we can assume that it was built for non-Jews, and therefore if you would want to bury a Jew there, I guess even though we don't normally do that, you would be able to, because you can assume that it was dug for a non-Jew on Shabbos, not for a Jew. But what about a coffin? We don't know where the coffin was assembled, and we have no way of knowing that it was we don't, it may have been assembled for a Jew, so why don't we just wait until enough time that it would take to assemble a coffin? So right, Aaron Ma'ikil Meimer, Amar Biba b'mutal al kivro. No, it's talking about where you have the grave and the coffin right in the same spot. And because they're both in the same spot, you can assume that both the grave and the coffin were built for a non-Jew, and therefore a Jew would be allowed to be buried in that coffin or in that grave immediately after Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Osin kol tzorkei ames. You're allowed to do anything that you need to do for a corpse. You're allowed to do on Shabbos. Sachin umadichin also. You can apply oil. You can wash the person who passed away. Uvavachelo yazis bo aver, but you just are not allowed to move any of his limbs because he's muksa. Shomten es haker mitachtov. You can slip the pillow from underneath the mace. Matilin also alachol, so that he will be lying directly on the sand. Bishvil sheyamtin, so that he will be preserved. Right, the pillows are warm and they can cause the body to you start to go. I don't know if rancid is the right word, but you want to prevent the meat from getting too hot. So therefore, you can slide out the pillow from underneath the body so that it's lying on the sand where it's cooler. Koshin is alechi. You are permitted to tie the jaw. If the jaw of the person who passed away begins to open, and you don't want the mouth to just be open, so you can tie it. Lo sheyayla ela shelo yosef, not that you're actually allowed to move the jaw and close the mouth, because we said that you're not allowed to move any part of the mace, but you can kind of tie it so that it doesn't continue to open anymore. V'chein, and similarly, koresh and ishbra, if you have the beam of a roof of a house that breaks, somchen osa b'safsal, o baruch samita, you would be allowed to support this beam with a bench or some kind of bedboard. And lo shetayla ela shelo tosif, now not that you can actually push up the beam, because that would be muksa, but just to make sure that it doesn't get any lower. Says the Gemara. So the Mishnah had said that you're allowed to apply oil to somebody who passed away. Rav Yehuda said the name of Shmuel. That there was a story with the student of Rab Meir. Now, there was actually a note, I think in the art school, that said it was Reb Shimon ben Elazar. We had seen a few days ago that Reb Shimon ben Elazar was a student of Rab Meir. So, alright. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Ma'aseh b'tamido shel Rab Meir. There was a story with the student of Rab Meir. Shenichnas acharav leveis hamerchatz, that this student went after Rab Meir to the bathhouse. Bikesh la'adiach karka, and this student wanted to wash the floor of the bathhouse, said it would be clean. Now, the floor of the bathhouse was made out of stone. It wasn't made out of dirt. Amar lo ein madichin. And nonetheless, Rab Meir said that you're not allowed to wash the floor of the bathhouse. Lasuch karka, so you wanted to at least be able to apply some oil to the floor so that there could be a good smell in the bathhouse. Amar lo ein sachin, and Reb Meir says, no, you're not allowed to apply oil to the floor of the bathhouse. So what the Gemara wanted to assume is that the reason why Reb Meir is saying that you're not allowed to apply oil to the floor of the bathhouse, or that you're not allowed to, wash the bathhouse, is because the stones are muktzah. And because the stones are muktzah, you're not allowed to apply oil to the muktzah stones. And here also, if the mace is muktzah, then you shouldn't be allowed to apply oil to the mace. So the Gemara answers no. It has nothing to do with muktzah. It has to do with, as we've seen on numerous times, ashvuye gumos, about will you fill in holes in the ground. And even though in the bathhouse the ground was made out of stone, and there really isn't an issue of filling in holes in the stone ground, however, says the Gemara, karka b'karka michalfa, mez b'karka lo michalef. However, even though the ground, the floor in the bathhouse was made out of stone, and there's no issue of filling in dirt holes. However, if you can, apply oil or wash the floor of the bathhouse, you may then apply oil or wash the floor of your house, which has a dirt floor, and it may lead to filling in holes. So that is why Reb Meir did not want his student to be messing around with the floor of the bathhouse. However, that's not a concern when it comes to a mace. When it comes to a mace, you can apply oil to the body. We're not concerned that you're then going to go and fill in floors, holes in the floor of your house. So that is why you're allowed to apply oil to the body of a mace on Shabbos. Kol asuye mai. When we say that you're allowed to do kol tzorkei mace on Shabbos, everything related to a mace, what is that coming to include? So the asuya adatanu rabbanan is coming to include that which the rabbis taught. Mevin klei meikar v'klei matechos umanichan al kreso kadei shelo tafuach. You are permitted to bring cooling vessels, like glass vessels or metal vessels, and place them on the stomach of the person who passed away, so that the stomach does not become bloated and split. And you can close up the orifices, the holes of the mace's body, so that Kadesh lo tikanis bein ruach, so that air doesn't get into the holes. And even Shlomo said in his wisdom about the splitting of the stomach of somebody who passed away, Ad asher lo yeratek chevel hakesef, until the spine does not become like a chain. The spine is referred, zechut hashidra. Hashidra, this is a reference to the spine because the spine is like a silver rope because it's white. Visarutz gulas hakesef, and the bowl of gold before that breaks. Ze'ama, that is the penis. V'tishaver kad ala mabua, and a vessel will break on the stream. Ze'akeres, that's a reference to the stomach which splits. V'narotz hagalgal elabor, and the wheel will run to the pit. Oh no, zet perish. Oh great, that's excrement. Alright. And similarly it says, V'zerisi perish al pnechem, I will throw excrement on your face. Better watch out. Perish chagechem, the excrement of your korbanos that you bring. This is a musar to the Yidden. Hashem was very unhappy with the Yidden, and he said, I'm going to throw the excrement of your offerings at you, because these offerings are more of an abomination than an offering. Amar Rav Huna said, Rav Huna v'Amrila Amar Rav Chaga, Elu b'nei Adam shemanichin divrei Torah v'osin kol yimem kichagim. These are the people who ignore the words of Torah and instead spend all of their lives like a big festival, just having fun. Okay? Amar Rav Levi, Amar Rav Papi, Amar Rav Yoshua lachar shlosha yamim, after 3 days, kreso nivkas, the stomach of a corpse splits, v'nofeles lo apanav, and like all of the excrement that's in his stomach falls on his face, v'omeres lo, and the stomach says to the face, Tomash and asatabi, take back what you put in me. Very, very beautiful. New Mishnah. Ein me'atzmin esamez b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to close the eyes of a mace on Shabbos, of a corpse on Shabbos, because it's muktzah, right? We said you're not allowed to move any part of the body of a mace. V'lo b'chol, imitzias nefesh. And also during the week, do not close the eyes of somebody who's dying, while he's dying. And anybody who closes the eyes of somebody who's dying, it's like he's killing the person. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, says the Gemara, somebody who closes the eyes of a corpse while his soul is leaving his body, he's killing him. How come? It's like a candle that is extinguishing. If you touch your finger to the wick as it is going out, immediately it will extinguish. So here also, by doing something so sort of slight, such as closing the eyes of the person who's passing away, immediately he's going to die. Tani, we're learning a brayso. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, Harotza sheis atzmu einav shomes. What if you? Here's like a interesting hack for if you want to close the eyes of a mace, maybe on Shabbos. Nofeach lo yain b'chotmo, so you blow wine into his nose. I don't know how to do this. How do you blow wine into somebody's nose? You like spit it into his nose? I don't know. I don't know. If you have any ideas, let us know. V'nosin shemen bein risei einav, and then you put oil between his eyelashes. V'ochiz v'shnei godlei raglev, and then you hold on to the 2 thumbs of the mace. Vein misatzmei meilein, and guess what happens? The eyes close. Tan Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, says Reb Shimon Gamliel, Tinok ben Yomo chai, if you have a 1-day-old baby who is alive, Mechalin olav es Shabbos, you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, whether it's probably to save him. David Melech Yisrael mace, ein Mechalin olav es Shabbos. Yet you have King David who's dead, you cannot be Mechal Shabbos for him. Tinok ben Yomo chai Mechalin olav es Shabbos. So a 1-day-old baby who is alive, you can be Mechal Shabbos for this child. Amar Torah, because the Torah says, Chalel olav Shabbos achas kadesh yishma b'Shabbos usaybe. Right, desecrate one Shabbos for this child, so that in the future he will then be able to preserve many Shabbosos, right? It's like an investment in the future, right? Do something to save this child today so that for the rest of his life, he can be Shomer Shabbos. But David Melech Yisrael mace, but even King David, once he dies, Ein Mechal in all of us, Ein Mechal in all of you cannot be Mechal Shabbos because Kevin Shemeis Adam Batal Mina Mitzvahs. Because once a person dies, he's Batal for Mitzvahs. So why should you be Mechal Shabbos for, even King David who's dead? For what end? What future benefit Yikilu? He's not shaykh to any mitzvahs. His life is over. So we're not going to be Mechal Shabbos for him. Meaning it sounds like you be Mechal Shabbos as sort of like an investment in the future. Be Mechal this Shabbos so that in the future it will end up leading, to much better things that I guess this Chilul Shabbos will pale in comparison, which is not the case for a mace who, at least as far as this world is concerned, doesn't have a future. This is what Rabbi Yochanan says, "B'meisim chavshi," that the pasuk in Tehillim says that it's like I am free like a dead person. What does that mean? Kevan shemeis adam naisa chavshi min mitzvahs. That once a person dies, he is free from mitzvahs. He's no longer shaykh to mitzvahs. V'tani Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Tinok ben Yom Ochai. If you have a 1 day old baby, ein tzarich l'shomer min achudo min achbarim. You do not have to save him from weasels and from rats or from mice. Aval Og Melech Habashan mace, but if you have a giant like Og Melech Habashan that he's dead, all of a sudden tzarich l'shomer min achudo min achbarim. All of a sudden you have to save him from weasels and from mice. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Morachem v'chitchem yeh," that your fear will be kol zman she'adam chai. Chitchem is like chayus. As long as a person is alive, emasu mutelas ala brios, his fear is upon the creations. Kevin shemeis betele emasu. But once he dies, then the creations do not fear him anymore. So as long as a person is alive, even a 1 day old baby, the weasels and mice will stay away from him. But once a person dies, even somebody as strong and mighty as Og Melech Habashan, the weasels don't care and they will try to chop a bite. Amr of Papa said of Papa, Nikitinan Aryeh Abetre Lo Nafil. So Papa says, look, a lion will not, attack two people. Haka chazinan denafil, but we see that lions do attack people. How could Rami bar Abba? That's like Rami bar Abba. The Amar Rami bar Abba in Chayy Shaletes Ba'adam Achinin Meloki Behema. An animal will not sort of attack a person unless that person appears to the animal like an animal. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Adam Bikar Bar Yalin. A person is unable to sleep with his wealth. Nimshal kabehema nidmu, right? And so the Metzudas David understands this pasuk to mean that a person who just relies upon his wealth, so it's just like it's just kind of like an animal, i.e., that it's unreliable. I guess he's more of an animal instinct than I don't know, because your wealth can just kind of go away quickly. But he's learning Nimshal Kabehemos Nidmu, that Kilu, if you look like an animal, so then I guess a animal will attack you. Amar B'chanina says Rabbi Chanina Asulishan B'vayis Yechidi V'chalayashim B'vayis Yechidi Achazas O Lilis Oy Va'avoy. Says Rabbi Chanina, you're not allowed to sleep at home by yourself, and if you do, well then Lilis will get you. Okay. V'tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Asay ad sha'ata motzei. So give tzedakah as long as you could while you could still find somebody to give it to. Umatzui lecha, and you have the money. V'odcha biyadcha, and you are still able to, do something with the money. I believe that's what odcha biyadcha was. Yeah. Oh, odcha right. You are still in your own control, says Rashi, before you die. Right. So basically, if you have money to be able to give it. And Shlomo said in his wisdom, remember your Creator in the days of when you are young, ad asher lo yavo yimei hara, before the bad days come, elu yimei hazikna. These are the days of old age. And then the years will come about which you will say, I do not desire them. Elu yimei Mashiach. So that is a reference to the times of Mashiach, that there won't be any zchus and there won't be any chova. There won't be any, as Rashi says, there won't be any zchus, says Rashi, lo davar lezakos bo shekulam ashirim. There won't be anything to merit because everybody will just be rich. V'lo chova la'ametz lev v'likpotz al yad. Right? And there won't be anything bad, obligations to which you will want to hold yourself back and not give. Everything will just be perfect. Interesting. Now this argues on Shmuel. Now this interpretation that says that everything will just be perfect and everybody will be really rich and have everything that they need and there won't be any problems during the days of Mashiach, well, that argues on Shmuel, who says that there's no difference between the world as we know it now and the world as will be during the days of Mashiach. The only difference will be Shibud Malchios, right? That just the I guess Israel or the Jewish people will have more autonomy. Yeah. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Ki lo yechtal evyon mikarev haaretz, that I will never abandon a destitute person from the land. Meaning there will always be destitute people, even in the future. Tanya Rabbi Elazar HaKapar Omer, says Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, L'olam yivakish adam rachamim al mida zo. A person should always pray that he shouldn't be poor. She'im hulo ba bino. That if he won't be poor, well then his son will be poor. V'im bino lo ba, ben bino ba. But if his son doesn't become poor, then his grandchild will become poor. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, ki beglal hadavar hazeh. Right? The pasuk says that if you give tzedakah, then because of this, Hashem will bless you. What does it mean? Beglal hadavar hazeh. That because of this, v'tana tver bishmal gal galu shechoz ba'olam. It was taught by the Besmedrish Rabbi Shmuel that this is like a circle that just repeats throughout the world. Meaning, people are going to be up, people are going to be down. There's no guarantee that just because one person has money, that the child will necessarily have money. So you always have to pray that that you shouldn't be poor, because even if you're not poor, then there's maybe your child will be or your grandchild. So therefore, you always have to pray to have money. Amar Rabbi Yosef, says Rabbi Yosef, Nikitina na'itub mirabbanan lo mi'ani. So Rabbi Yosef says, look, Torah students do not become poor. But we do see that there are Torah students that become poor. So he says, yeah, but it's true. There are Torah students who are poor, but you won't see them walking around begging for money, right? It won't get to that point where they have to walk around begging for money. Even though they're poor, one way or another, their basic needs, I guess, will be met without having to sort of embarrass themselves or degrade themselves. Amar la Rabbi Chia l'dvisu. Rabbi Chia said to his wife, Ki asi anya akdimi le'rifta. If a poor person ever, comes to the door asking for bread, or comes to the door, give this person bread. Ki echi delikdimu livnech. So that when your children are poor, other people will give your children bread. Amrle milat ka laitaslu. So then Rabbi Chia's wife said to him, why are you cursing our children that they should be poor? Amar la, he said, look, it's not me. Krakaksiv, the pasuk says, Ki beglal hadavar hazeh, that because of this thing, v'tanat Rabbi Shmuel gal galu shechoz ba'olam, that it is a wheel that turns and turns in the world, i.e., sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. Even if we have money, there's no guarantee that our children will have money. And therefore, whenever a poor person comes to the door, make sure to give him bread so that, when our poor children or grandchildren will have to knock on somebody else's door, they will give him bread. Tani, we're learning the Brayso of Gamliel, Rebbe Omer. Says Rebbe Yehuda Nasi's son, Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel. This is not the Rabbi Gamliel. The Rabbi Gamliel is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's grandfather. This is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's son. That God will give to you mercy, and He will have mercy on you, and He will make you, plentiful. Anybody who has mercy on the creations, well then God will have mercy on him. And anybody who doesn't have mercy on the creations, well then God will not have mercy on him. Okay, so the Gemara continues with the next pasuk in Koheles, right? The pasuk in Koheles said, right, that Shlomo Melech said, remember God when you are young, before you get old. So in the very next pasuk said, Ada shelo techshach hashemesh, before the sun becomes dark, va'or, and the light. Zo padachas ve'achotem, this is the forehead and the nose. Ve'ayareach, and the moon, zo neshama, that is the soul. Ve'akochavim elu alisatos, these stars are the jaws. V'shavua avim achar geshem, and the clouds will come back after the rain. Zo me'or einaim, me'or einav shel adam, this is a person's vision. Sheholech achar bechi, that weakens after you cry too much. As Rashi says, too much crying that will come later in life. because you in response to having gotten much weaker. Amr Shmuel said Shmuel. Now, of course, Shmuel was a doctor. So your tears for the first 40 years of your life, any tears that you cry will be replenished. But after 40 years, lo hadra, your tears will not be replenished. Amr Rav Nachman said, Rav Nachman, if you have eye drops, so for the first 40 years of your life, eye drops will help your eyesight. However, after 40 years old, so I guess even if you, have some kind of thing that you would apply eye salve to your eyes with that was like as big and heavy as the beam of a weaver, it still will only sort of keep things the way they are, but not increase your eyesight and make it better. Okay, basically the point being that this eye salve will be beneficial for the first 40 years of your life, but not after that. Well, it will just kind of preserve things, but it won't make them better per se. My kamash malan, what does this come to teach us? The kama de olim mikuchla tfei maile. My kamash malan, the kama de olim mikuchla tfei maile. So the point is that I guess the thicker you lay on the eye salve, the better it will be. Although it sounds like that would only be up for 40 years, but even after 40 years, I guess it still preserves your eyesight. Rav Chanina shchivale barte. Rav Chanina, his daughter passed away. Lohava kabachi Allah, and he didn't cry for his daughter who passed away. Amrle divisu. So Rav Chanina's wife said to him, "Tanagolta afikas mi beisach." What is it? Just like a chicken, left the house? What, like you don't care that your daughter passed away? Amrla tarte tichla ve'ivar. He says, no, of course I care. But if I would cry, then I would have two losses. One is my daughter and one is my eyesight. So he didn't want to cry. Savalak Yihada Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because he held like that which Rabbi Yochanan said, Mishum Rabbi Yossi ben Ktsarta, Sheish Dema was saying there are 6 types of tears. Shalosh Yafos v'shalosh Ros. 3 of them are good and 3 of them are bad. Shalashim v'shalbechi v'shalbesakise. Tears that you cry because of smoke or because of crying or because of having trouble in the bathroom, Ros, those are bad for you. Shosam v'shal schok v'shal peris yafos. If it's from some kind of a medicine, or from laughing, or from very good and fragrant fruits, it's so good that you cry because of it, well, yafos, those are good for you. Friends, that was Daf Kuf Nun Aleph Masechta Shabbos. Pretty interesting, right? Sure. Okay, so at the beginning we talked about that statement of Abba Shaul about going to the edge of the Tchum and just kind of clarifying what is going on. Then we talked about sounding a flute at a funeral if the flute was brought on Shabbos by a non-Jew. So of course the funeral would be after Shabbos. So Rav says you have to know for 100% certainty, with 100% certainty, that the flute came from within the Tchum Shabbos. Where Shmuel says no, as long as you don't know, you can assume that it came from within the Tchum Shabbos. We talked about mesim, that you can do all of the needs of a mace on Shabbos, although the mace himself is muktzah, but other than that you can do whatever preparations of the mace on Shabbos. And then we just had a whole bunch of agadatas about mesim and other things. But friends, that was Daf Kuf Nun Aleph. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day or night. Peace.